Welcome to Fast Track: How to Win Work Without Experience. Getting hired on Upwork when you're brand new is a catch-22. You have no history or positive reviews yet. You may not have any quality portfolio samples to show to potential clients. You may not even have any experience doing the type of work you want to do. And yet, you need to gain a client's trust in order for them to hire you. If you're in this situation, don't worry. I've got you covered. I started with all of the challenges of being new and inexperienced, and I was able to overcome them very quickly using the exact approach that I'm going to teach you in this lesson. If you've heard my story at all, you know that I quit my quote-unquote real job on a Friday morning and started bidding on freelancing jobs that very same day, with absolutely no clue what I was even doing. Yet, even with the entire deck stacked against me, I was still able to secure several paid gigs in just my first week, with many more to follow. To do that, I used an approach I call my crystal ball technique. As you'll see, it's something that virtually anyone can do in order to win work quickly, regardless of where you're at. I've also taught this approach to thousands of freelancers and aspiring freelancers, and we've seen it work predictably time and time again. Many freelancers try to overcome the disadvantage of being new by presenting themselves to clients as the cheapest option. But high-quality clients aren't looking for the cheapest option. Hiring a freelancer isn't like buying a potato peeler, where all of their options are mostly the same, and so they just automatically go with the least expensive one. On the contrary, the high-quality client knows that the quality of the work they receive can vary big time, depending on which freelancer they choose. So their primary concern is picking someone who gives them confidence that the job will get done right. Just like you don't choose restaurants based on what's cheapest. If you did, you'd only ever eat from the Burger King dollar menu, right? Price is far from being the strongest human motivator, and there's nothing peculiar about Upwork that makes this universal truth any less real. As we discussed earlier in the course, the only time good clients start to price shop is when they view your freelancing services as a commodity. In other words, when they perceive that you are just like everyone else. But, as you'll see, the crystal ball technique actually prevents that from happening in the first place. More on that in just a bit. Another mistake many new freelancers make is that they decide to create portfolio samples out of thin air in order to make it look like they have previous experience. These are essentially just dummy pieces that exist only to show off their skills. But this never works, and I'll tell you why. Freelancers who take this path end up creating samples that don't interest clients in the least. For instance, a new freelancer might write a blog post about their own neighborhood, or they might create a brochure for their best friend's business. The problem with this approach is that they usually end up with a bunch of samples that no one cares about. Clients don't want to see random samples of work. They want to see examples that are similar to what they need, because that takes the guesswork out of the equation for them. It proves that you can get their job done, which is all high-quality clients really care about. This idea of relevance is so important that, all else being equal, a high-quality client will generally hire the freelancer who's able to produce an example of work that is most similar to what they need. To fully understand the psychology behind this, let's look at an example from the wedding cake business. Imagine a bride-to-be looking for a very specific flavor of cake for her wedding. Mentally, she knows exactly what she wants it to taste like. So she starts describing it to wedding cake designers. The first two she meets with both assure her that they can create exactly what she's looking for. They go on and on about their credentials and experience. They even let her taste a few of their sample wedding cakes. But neither of them have been able to show her a cake that's really similar to what she wants. So she goes and talks to a third baker. This time, she has a totally different experience. The third confectioner surprises her by opening up his refrigerator and pulling out a cake that's nearly identical to what she's described. She takes a taste and, lo and behold, she likes it. Now, what do you suppose is going to happen next? Do you think she's going to go back and take a gamble with one of the previous bakers, having no idea if they're really capable of producing what she wants? Of course not. She's already found a baker who's proven that he can get the job done. Even if it's not the most amazing cake she's ever tasted, there's simply no way she's going to sweat it out by choosing one of the first two bakers because she knows the third baker can deliver. Now let's talk about how this applies to freelancing. Let's take the wedding cake analogy and replace the bride-to-be with a client who's looking for someone to write a blog post on the most romantic places to kiss in New York City. Naturally, the client gets a bunch of proposals from various freelancers. A handful of them may contain samples that are somewhat relevant. Maybe they have to do with New York, or maybe they're about some romantic topic. But what happens if you come along with an example of a blog post you've written about the most romantic places to go on a date in Paris? Like our wedding cake designer, you would have done a great job of matching the flavor the client is looking for, while your competitors are likely not going to produce anything nearly as relevant. And also like our wedding cake designer, you'll have significantly increased your chances of getting hired, regardless of your experience level. I know this because as a new freelancer, I won jobs over veterans with more technical know-how and experience, and in many cases, my prices were even higher than theirs, because I was able to show the client portfolio samples that were very relevant to what they wanted, and I didn't have to read their minds to do it. All I had to do was read their job posts. Okay, so the way the crystal ball technique works is that you create and use portfolio samples that are similar, though not identical, to what actual clients are asking for. This last point is very important. By keeping your sample a little different, you won't tempt unscrupulous clients to plagiarize from you. So, for example, let's say a client needs copywriting for an About Us page for a dental practice website. In this case, I might create a sample About Us page for a fictitious chiropractic office. It's not something that the client can just take and use, so I'm totally safe. Yet, at the same time, it does a great job of matching the flavor of work the client is looking for. And because of that, it gives me an excellent chance of being hired, because it shows the client that I have the skills necessary to complete the job. And by the way, we'll talk more about how to get those skills shortly. So what we're doing here is creating a portfolio from scratch, but we're doing it very strategically, in a way that gives us the best chance of getting work as quickly as possible, rather than the traditional method where you're just creating random samples and throwing them against a wall, hoping that one of them sticks. This is what I call a minimum viable portfolio, or MVP for short. Okay, now, if you're brand new to freelancing, some of this might still seem a little bit intimidating. If you're like me, you might not even know how to create any samples to begin with. Well, don't worry, because I'm going to walk you through exactly how I did this over and over again in my first few months. Personally, I had no clue what a portfolio sample was even supposed to look like when I first started applying to freelancing jobs. So my strategy was to look for small writing jobs that didn't necessarily require any previous experience or technical knowledge, and then use Google to figure out how to complete them. For example, it's really easy to Google something like how to write a blog post and walk away with an understanding of exactly how to do this in just a few minutes. Or you can search for something like best about us pages and get great examples to use as a guide. Sometimes Upwork clients even provide examples themselves, which can give you a blueprint for doing the work exactly how they want it. These approaches worked really well for me when I was just starting out. They helped me get real, paying work done without much pressure. And with each small job I did, I gained experience that helped me win and complete jobs that were incrementally more substantial and better paying. By the way, one of the best features of the crystal ball technique is that it has a built-in failsafe. Here's what I mean by that. Some new freelancers are worried that even if clients hire them, they may not be able to properly deliver the work. But with the crystal ball technique, you never have to worry about that, because it automatically prevents you from getting in over your head. Think about it. If a client is hiring you, that means they've already seen one of your minimum viable portfolio samples. It also means that they liked your sample, because otherwise they wouldn't be hiring you as a result of seeing it. And remember that your sample is almost identical to the type of work they're hiring you for, which means that now your job is as simple as just doing it again. And we already know they like your work. When you think about it, there's virtually no way you can fail in this type of situation. You've essentially already proven that you're capable of getting the job done. You've not only proven it to the client, you've also proven it to yourself. So, as you can see, the crystal ball technique is a very safe, very low pressure way to ease yourself into freelancing or a new niche. Let's talk about how I won my first ever freelancing job using this approach. The client needed short children's stories. I'd never written one before, but it didn't require any imagination or special skills, because the stories all followed a specific formula. They were all about a young boy who would visit famous places with his parents, and he always learned 3 things about the destinations they visited. So for each story, all I had to do was look up a few facts about a tourist site, like the Grand Canyon, for example. And then I basically just plugged that information into the story's template. Luckily, the client posted an example of one of the stories right in the job post, so I was able to use the crystal ball technique to win the gig. Because of that, the client didn't even ask about my work history, my experience level, or anything else. Showing him that I was capable of completing a story that was similar to what he needed was enough. By the way, in case you're wondering, I was paid $20 for each story, and they only took about 45 minutes to complete. It's not a ton of money, and it certainly isn't very sexy, but not bad either when you consider that I had no experience whatsoever, and it was only my first week. I made $340 writing these, and I was totally stoked. But I didn't stop there. Let me show you a couple more examples. Okay, so one of the very next jobs I won was writing job advertisements for a service-based company in Australia. All they were asking for in their original job post was someone who could write their job ads with some creativity and flair. Again, no special experience or technical knowledge was required. In fact, it's really easy to go to sites like Indeed.com, find some ads that you really like, see what makes them powerful, and just apply that knowledge, along with some creativity and common sense, to create an MVP sample that the client will probably like, using the crystal ball technique. In this case, I just wrote up a sample and sent it to the client, and it worked like a charm. I won the job at $40 per hour, which was the highest bid out of all the other freelancers who applied. Mind you, this was still my first month freelancing, So I was totally new, and the client even became a repeat customer. Okay, let's talk about one more job I won in those very early days using the crystal ball technique. This one for email copywriting. This is a useful story because it was sort of a breakthrough for me. I'd noticed a couple of weeks earlier that some email copywriting jobs tended to pay pretty well. So I was determined to get in on this niche. There was just one problem. I had no idea how to write a marketing email. So I did a Google search for how to write a marketing email. Pretty simple, right? Next, I read some of the articles that popped up, and I jotted down a few of the simplest best practices I could find. Then I did another search, this time to research the topic I wanted to write the email about, which at the time was health and fitness related. I put these two pieces of newfound knowledge together and wrote my first ever email copywriting sample. It was really short and simple. I'll even show you the actual email I wrote in a couple of minutes, so you can see how uncomplicated this really is. And I used that MVP sample to land a job writing a series of 18 marketing emails. Again, this was just my 5th week, and I was the highest bidder for the project. I even ended up getting over $6,500 in work from this client over the next couple of years, and it all came from just that one short sample. Okay, now before I show you that email, I want to explain a couple of key points. First, the crystal ball technique is meant to be a short-term approach only. As you complete more and more jobs over time, you'll end up with a wider and wider range of work samples to show to clients who have varying needs. Plus, as you build up your job history and client reviews, it becomes much easier to win jobs. So you can often get away with samples that are a bit less relevant as time goes on. For example, that fitness marketing email sample I told you about earlier ended up coming in handy over and over again to win many different email writing jobs that had nothing to do with fitness. So you want to get to a point where you don't have to rely on the crystal ball technique to win plenty of work. In fact, I can win jobs today without ever showing the client a portfolio sample at all. They often hire me based only on my Upwork history and client reviews. So remember, don't rely on the crystal ball technique for longer than you need to. You can always use it down the road if you happen to fall into a slump or if you want to break into a new niche. Another important point I want to make about the crystal ball technique is that you should focus on creating high-quality MVP samples. You don't need to be a perfectionist and spend hours on each one, but you shouldn't be afraid to put some work into them either. I recommend creating short samples. That's what I did, and it assured that I wasn't pouring too much time into each one. But they do need to look good. This takes a little more time and work up front, but if done right, it can really pay off. Think of the marketing email client who ended up paying me over $6,500 after I showed him just one single sample. Also keep in mind that if you create a good sample, it doesn't go to waste even if you happen to not get the job you're applying for, because you can continue to use that sample over and over again. Like the fitness email I used to get hired for many different jobs. And again, you don't need to rely on the crystal ball technique for very long. As you gain more and more experience, it becomes much easier to win jobs with the portfolio of work that you naturally create over time, especially since you'll also be building up a good history and good client reviews. All right, now let's look at that fitness email I've been telling you about. The reason I'm showing this to you is because I want you to see that it's so simple and so straightforward that virtually anyone could have done it. It didn't require any special skills whatsoever. Again, I simply searched Google for best practices on how to do email copywriting. And I also searched for how to burn fat, and I came up with an interesting angle for a simple little marketing email. Now, I will tell you that my writing and my style have both evolved since I wrote this. So this isn't necessarily a how-to lesson on how to do email copywriting, though it really isn't a bad sample either. But the point is that I was able to use this sample to win thousands of dollars worth of real jobs for email copywriting, even ones that were not related to fitness. Remember, the point isn't to give the client what they need on a silver platter, but rather to show them that you have the ability to get their job done well. Also, keep in mind that the crystal ball technique can be applied to just about any type of work. It doesn't have to be email copywriting, and in fact, it doesn't have to be writing at all. I've had students use this approach to win work across all different industries and niches, including graphic design, marketing, finance, engineering, video production, and much more. Okay, let's do a quick recap of what we've covered in this lesson. Winning jobs on Upwork can be tricky, especially if you're brand new. Creating work samples that address clients' specific needs helps you jump to the front of the line because it shows clients that you can do their work even if you're lacking experience. Your samples should have a flavor that are similar to what real clients are looking for, but be sure to make them different enough that there's no way the client can actually use them. When you create samples using this technique, focus on quality, but keep them short so they don't suck up all your time. Keep in mind that the crystal ball technique is a short-term approach. As your portfolio and client reviews grow, winning work becomes easier and easier without having to rely on it. Though you may still choose to use it again in the future if you ever need to get yourself out of a slump or break into a new niche. Now it's time for some action steps. Here's what I want you to do right after you're done watching this lesson. First, go to Upwork's job listings and start identifying jobs that look like they might be good candidates for using the crystal ball technique. Once you've got a few job posts to work with, pick out the one that has the most potential and create a portfolio sample that has a similar flavor to it, but is still different enough that the client can't use it. Then, submit it to the client along with a proposal. And finally, continue to repeat this process until clients start to message you back with compliments on your samples. That's how you'll know you've nailed it. Remember, when the deck is stacked against you, you need to do everything you can to turn the tables and give yourself the advantage you need to win. And on that topic, like all the other ones in this course, I speak from personal experience. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.